What's up guys, my name is Ace, and yesterday I covered all of the miscellaneous changes from Season 3 of Modern Warfare 3, including changes to perks and equipment, as well as various bug fixes. Today, we're going to be covering all of the weapon balancing that took place with the Season 3 updates. And without further ado, let's just dive right into it since we have a lot to cover today. And the first thing I wanted to point out is they mentioned they decreased the obstructive visual effects while firing Modern Warfare 2 weapons to align with Modern Warfare 3 standards. And let's take a look at this side by side using the M4 pre-patch versus post-patch. And if you pay really close attention as you're firing, on the left-hand side pre-patch, we can see a lot more smoke when you're firing your gun. And that smoke actually seems to get in between you and your gun, whereas post-patch, there's barely any muzzle smoke here at all. And I believe that was the primary thing they changed with this. And if we look at a screenshot here, the moment a shot is fired before and after, you can definitely see it's a lot hazier on the left side compared to the right side, where things are much more clear. So definitely a nice noticeable change here that applied to all of the Modern Warfare 2 guns, as far as I can tell. Next up, across the board, they removed the variance of aim down sight idle sway to allow for a predictable sway pattern. And when we look at it pre-patch here, you can see it follows kind of a general figure 8-ish pattern, but there's a fair amount of variance within that and some randomness programmed in. Whereas post-patch, we still see that same general pattern, but now there's no variance mixed in there. It's always going to follow that same predictable path over and over again. And for me, I think that's great, eliminating the randomness from that equation. Now let's dive into the specific weapons, and we'll start it off with the assault rifle category. And the first thing that changed here is the RAM-7. What they've done here is they just decreased the neck damage multiplier. Previously, it was equal to our headshot damage multiplier, whereas now it's equal to our torso and arm damage. And this will just mean that it'll be slightly less frequent that you'll get a 4-shot kill by mixing a neck shot in, because now you have to hit a headshot rather than a neck shot to get that 4-shot kill. Then after that, with the Holger 5.56, they decreased our leg damage multipliers. Pre-patch, we actually dealt the same amount of damage anywhere in the body, and then we had a separate headshot multiplier. Post-patch, we now just deal less damage to the legs, and therefore it's going to be a little bit less forgiving there. You want to make sure you're hitting torso and arms, which is still pretty easy to do, but leg shots will be punishing now. Then the MCW saw a huge nerf. They actually eliminated its headshot damage multiplier, and we now deal the same amount of damage to the head as we do to the upper torso and arms. And previously, one of the big upsides with the MCW is it was one of the few guns where you only needed one headshot mixed in with those upper torso shots to reduce the number of shots to kill. And that's obviously no longer the case since we don't even deal any extra damage to the head. So this was actually a pretty massive nerf to the MCW overall. However, a big thing I want to point out here is this nerf did not apply to the Jack Raven kit. We have the same damage multipliers with that kit as we had pre-patch. And as a result, we can still reduce the number of shots to kill by just mixing one headshot in there with the Raven kit. And therefore, the Raven kit is the clear choice in public matches now. I would never even consider using the default MCW. I'm always going with that Raven kit. And honestly, I think they took this nerf too far with the MCW. I would have been fine if they reworked the damage profile to make it so you needed multiple headshots mixed in with body shots to reduce the number of shots to kill. But making it so you don't deal any bonus damage at all to the head, that was a bit too much in my eyes. In either case, the last assault rifle change here was to the DG56, and for some reason they nerfed our sprintout time from 178 milliseconds to 199 milliseconds. And while this isn't a massive nerf by any means, it is a little bit puzzling. I didn't really see the DG56 as a problem since the nerfs that it got fairly early on in this game. In either case, let's move into the battle rifle category, and the SOA Subverter saw a few nerfs. First off, our aim down sight speed was increased from 270 milliseconds up to 290 milliseconds, so that's a noticeable nerf to that. And our sprint out time was very slightly nerfed, however, that is a lot less noticeable than the aim down sight nerf. Then after that, we saw some very big nerfs to the BAS-B. The first thing they did here is they cut our rate of fire from 667 rounds per minute down to 600 rounds per minute, which means our new time to kill potential up close is 300 milliseconds, which isn't really a standout anymore. It's not a bad time to kill, but it used to have a standout time to kill, and that's just no longer the case. But that's not all they did with the BAS-B. They also decreased our recoil center speed by 6%. And when we look at the recoil pre-patch versus post-patch, it doesn't really look much worse post-patch. And the reason behind this is we also have a reduced fire rate, and the slower your rate of fire, the more time you have to recenter between shots. And I believe that's why they decreased the recoil center speed, is more so just to balance out the recoil, so it wouldn't change too drastically with that rate of fire adjustment. Also, just a quick note here, you might notice they actually changed my recoil wall. They changed some of the colors on terminal. I don't know why this is the case, but now it's a lot harder for me to pinpoint exact bullet holes, which is really unfortunate. I'd love for them to revert this back, but if they don't, I may need to find another recoil wall somewhere. But back on topic, those were the nerfs to the base BAS-B. However, they also adjusted the JAK Outlaw kit a little bit here. And what they've done here is they've buffed it in various ways because they nerfed it into oblivion shortly after it came out. So this is just a bit of a correction to that. The first thing they did is they improved both our aim down sight speed as well as our sprint out time by very noticeable margins, especially with that aim down sight time. So that's good. It's nice and snappy again. On top of this, when you're aiming down sight with this gun, your rate of fire is actually reduced. However, they reduced that penalty a little bit. Pre-patch while aiming down sight, our rate of fire was 132 rounds per minute, whereas post-patch, it's now 145 rounds per minute when aiming down sight. So there is a slight improvement there, although that wasn't major by any means. And then finally for the BAS-B, they effectively just eliminated the last 2 damage ranges, meaning that this is now always going to be a 2-shot kill to the body unless you're shooting through some form of cover. Even if you're shooting them like in the foot at extremely long ranges, it's going to be a 2-shot kill. And I do think that's appropriate with where this gun is currently at. At least it's got some consistency now. You still can't get a 1-shot kill to the body like we could when it first came out, but this is at least very noticeably better than it was after that nerf took place. And then finally, for the battle rifle category, the Sidewinder saw a couple buffs. The first buff was to its sprint out time. This went from 231 milliseconds down to 210, so that's a nice improvement. And then also our bullet velocity was very noticeably increased from 600 meters per second up to 770 meters per second. After that, let's get into the SMG category, and there were a lot of little changes to the SMGs, but let's first cover the one big change, which was to the RAAL MG9. What they've done here is, first off, they eliminated our second damage range. That's just gone now. And then on top of this, our bonus damage that we used to deal to the torso and arms, now that applies only to the upper torso and upper arms. So what this means is we still have the same potential shots to kill to the body, it's just going to include a smaller zone now, so you have to be a bit more precise with your shots, and it's slightly less forgiving with those body multipliers. On top of that, with the RAAL MG9 though, we did see a slight nerf to our sprint out time from 93 milliseconds up to 110 milliseconds. And then after that, we saw sprint out changes pretty much across the board for the SMG category. So I'm just going to blast through these really quickly. We saw a slight buff to our sprint out time when it came to the RAM9 as well as the AMR9, which was nice. Then we saw sprint out nerfs to the HRM9, the Striker 9, the Striker 45, the WSP9, as well as the WSP Swarm, although all of these sprint out changes were quite minor. I wouldn't say this is going to have a massive impact on the performance of these guns. In fact, in one case, it literally changed by 3 milliseconds, which you'll never be able to notice. So I wouldn't be too worried about these changes to the sprint out times on these SMGs because you won't notice in the majority of these cases. After that, we got 2 new muzzle attachments for Modern Warfare 3 shotguns, and these are the Long Haul 50, as well as the Wolf Call 300, and with both of these, they improve our vertical and horizontal recoil control, which generally you don't need for shotguns. I don't see myself using these, but I wanted to point out these are brand new. Then let's get into the LMG category, and the TAQ Evolvere saw some nerfs to its handling stats. So our aim down sight time was slowed down from 385 milliseconds to 415 milliseconds, and our sprint out time was also very slightly nerfed here as well with this gun. After that, if you're using the 7.62 ammo on the TAQ Evolvere, they reduced our neck shot damage, so it's no longer equal to our headshot damage. It's now equal to our upper torso and arm damage. So effectively, the same nerf we saw to the RAM7. This shouldn't have a significant impact on the performance of this gun. And then another thing they did with this gun, with 5.56 ammo in particular, is they reduced our rate of fire with this ammo from 857 rounds per minute down to 789 rounds per minute. And I wanted to also show recoil before and after, since if you're changing rate of fire, it is going to have an impact on how your recoil performs. And it turns out it looks like our recoil is a lot more shaky post-patch compared to pre-patch. There's a lot more side-to-side bounce there to deal with. And of course, with that rate of fire change, our time to kill is slower. Up close, we're now killing in 304 milliseconds, which again, just like I said with the BAS-B, this isn't a bad time to kill, but it used to have a pretty exceptional time to kill, whereas now it's just kind of average. But then let's move on to the Bruen MK9. This one saw a nice improvement to its aim down sight time from 410 milliseconds down to 350. That is a very noticeable change. Then with the RAAL MG, we saw some nerfs to its handling stats, so our aim down sight speed and our sprint out speed are slower now post-patch, which was a bit confusing to me since this gun wasn't really a standout. However, I believe the reason they did this is we actually saw some very notable buffs to damage, and that was just designed to offset these buffs. But effectively, what they've done here is they very noticeably increased our upper torso damage, keeping in mind this doesn't apply to the arms like with many of the other guns, it's just upper torso, and they also buffed our neck shot damage to be equal to our headshot damage. And what these damage changes mean is we can now get a 3-shot kill to the body if we're just hitting those upper torso, neck, or head shots, whereas pre-patch, we needed headshots to get a 3-shot kill. So this also means our body time to kill potential up close is 216 milliseconds if you can manage that 3-shot kill. So the RAAL's got some potential here as long as you're precise with your shots and can ensure that you're hitting upper torso, neck, or headshots. And that's it for the LMG changes. Now let's move into marksman rifles. And the MTZ Interceptor saw some nerfs. The first thing they've done here is they slowed our aim down sight time down from 280 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds. And then we saw some damage adjustments. And essentially, the maximum damage range is untouched, but everything after that has changed. And pre-patch, this gun was always a 2-shot kill to the body. Even at extreme ranges to the foot, it was a 2-shot kill. Whereas now, beyond that maximum damage range, if we're hitting leg shots, we can get up to a 3-shot kill. So this is going to be a pretty big nerf to the overall consistency of the MTZ Interceptor beyond its maximum damage range. Then moving on, let's get into the sniper rifle category. The XRK Stalker saw yet another nerf. Its aim down sight time went from 580 milliseconds up to 600 milliseconds. We see a similar story with the KV Inhibitor. This was nerfed from 540 milliseconds up to 580 milliseconds for our aim down sight time. And then finally, the SPX-80 saw some more nerfs as well. Its aim down sight time was nerfed by 20 milliseconds, and our sprint out time was nerfed by 40 milliseconds. So those 3 snipers will be a little bit worse after this update. Now finally, for individual weapons, we did see a couple adjustments to some secondaries. The first thing that was changed here is with the TYR using the Snakeshot ammo pre-patch, we could only hit our target out to 14.5 meters, and anything beyond that, we couldn't get a hit at all. They've extended that maximum hit potential up to 19.6 meters without impacting any of our other ranges, so we're just capable of getting a hit at longer ranges, even though it is going to take you several shots to kill, and I wouldn't call that an effective range for this gun. And then finally, we saw a rate of fire buff when using the WSP Stinger in Akimbo. Pre-patch, each gun would fire at 600 rounds per minute. Now they fire at 750 rounds per minute. And what this means is our up-close time to kill potential in Akimbo used to be 200 milliseconds. Now it's 160 milliseconds, which is nice to see. And that right there wraps it up for all of the individual weapon adjustments. However, there were also a bunch of key adjustments to various attachments, and some of these are quite important to know about, so don't click off just yet. The first thing to talk about is the heavy bolts on sniper rifles. Previously, there was really no good reason to use the heavy bolt. It slowed down your rate of fire with little to no real benefit to the performance of the gun, since rechamber accuracy is kinda pointless 99% of the time. Whereas now, they added an initial accuracy benefit to the heavy bolt attachment specifically. And this was quite noticeable. We can see here, pre-patch with the XRK Stalker using the heavy bolt, every time I aim down sight, you'll see that I'm often pretty far off of the center of my screen, whereas post-patch, when using that heavy bolt, you can see every time I aim down sight, I'm nearly perfectly centered, at least in the moment that I first get aim down sights, and then it will drift off of that point from there. But this will actually make quickscoping way more accurate with sniper rifles, and in some cases, you may want to consider trying out that heavy bolt, even though it will slow down your rate of fire. Next up for attachment changes, for many of the lasers, they changed when the laser beam is going to be visible to enemy players. And the first thing here is actually to an optic. With the Cronin Intless MSP12 optic, the laser will no longer be visible to enemies when in hip fire, but it will be visible when you aim down sight. Then with the SL Razorhawk laser light, for both the flashlight and the laser, they will no longer be visible unless you're aiming down sight. After that, with the CS15 Scarlet Box laser, the laser beam will no longer be visible at all to enemy players. And then finally for these lasers, with the Verdant Hook Box laser, the laser will no longer be visible to the enemies when hip firing, only when aiming down sight. And this just leaves us with a few more miscellaneous attachments that saw some adjustments. With the VT7 Spiritfire Suppressor, this one saw an increased sprint to fire penalty from 2% up to 5%, so a bit of a nerf to that one. Then with the L4R Flash Hider Muzzle, they decreased the horizontal recoil control benefit from 13% down to 10%. So, I mean, it's still helping nicely with horizontal recoil, and I still consider this to be quite a solid choice in the muzzle section, but it will be slightly worse when dealing with horizontal recoil. Then, unfortunately, the DR6 hand stop saw a nerf to its aim down sight and movement speed benefit by 3 to 4% depending on the weapon class. So they actually nerfed that just a little bit, so it's not going to help quite as much to handling and movement. And then finally, for our attachment changes, with the Bruen Heavy Support Grip Underbarrel, they decreased the horizontal recoil control benefit from 12% to 8%. So again, just like with the L4R Flash Hider, it's not going to be quite as good at helping with horizontal recoil, but it's still a solid attachment to use. And there we go. That's finally going to wrap it up for all of the weapon and attachment changes that took place with the Season 3 updates. And this is where I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. How are you feeling about all of these changes that they made? Do you feel like this mixed up the meta nicely? Do you think these were generally appropriate changes? Do you think some of these changes were maybe a bit too far, like I do with the MCW headshot nerf? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.